Greetings, wondrous ones out there in the digital hyperspace, multidimensional world of social media and planet Mother Earth, Gaia. And it's been a while since I've done a live, and it's been a while since I've done a Wisdom Warrior transmission. I usually post them on my YouTube channel. I'll upload this there afterwards as well for those who follow and subscribe to my channel there. And I just wanted to check in about a few things, about a few of the things that I've been experiencing, and just thoughts as per usual about world events with, a bit of a mystical, spiritual perspective on things. So, something that's come to mind and something that I've shared, in the past, not only the past year and a half during the pandemic, but beyond the pandemic. One of my favorite pieces of mythological literature is the idea of the Shambhala warrior prophecy. And this is something that was brought to my attention by the great eco-spiritual warrior, Joanna Macy. And she received this from her own Tibetan Buddhist teachers. And if you're not aware of this, you can go onto YouTube, just type in Joanna Macy, M-A-C-Y, Shambhala warrior prophecy, and you can absorb this very vital piece of information from a very ancient culture, a very wise culture. But why it was on my mind today, and has been pretty much throughout this whole pandemic, is because it describes basically the time that we're living in right now. And what is described is that there will come a time where, in their rendering mythologically of this kind of struggle between forces that are, pro-humanity, pro-expansion of human consciousness, beauty and truth, they are struggling against forces that they describe as barbarian. And they describe that there will come a time in the future where the barbarian territory, which you could say is Western civilization in a way, is kind of extended all over the earth. So there's no real safe haven for us to really fight and regenerate, for those of us who are the Shambhala warriors. And the Shambhala warriors are said to be the beings that come to help transform this barbarian mindset and to dismantle the barbarian empire. And there's two ways that this is done. The first way, and this is what's important for this talk today, is that the Shambhala warriors realize that everything that is in human civilization comes from the human mind. And if it has come from the human mind, then it can be dismantled by a very enlightened form of human mindful consciousness. And the second thing is that we dismantle this kind of tyrannical complex by understanding very deeply and embodying this knowing that the radical interdependence of all beings, that everything is connected, everything is one on a certain level. There's a cooperative, interdependent energy happening, not only within our species, but within the ecology of Earth and within the ecology of the whole cosmic universe. And so, I started with, some people might think, a very provocative statement, when science becomes religion. But if you've been following sort of my messages and stuff throughout, you know that I'm very, I'm just going to move this. Seems like the autofocus cannot understand the beauty of Costa Rica. If you follow my teachings and my writings, you know that I've been very heavily critical of science. And this is an important thing because this goes hand in hand with this Shambhala warrior prophecy, in the sense that we are living in a time where we're being called to really look at our belief systems, to look at our value systems as a human species, and try and understand what is it that we need to dismantle. I mean, people talk about dismantling colonialism, for example, and dismantling patriarchy, all very noble endeavors. But to truly do that work, there's a lot of other things that are proponents of those world systems and those world views that may be surprising to people, that need to be criticized and dismantled. And I would say science is definitely one of them. And before I, really delve into this, because I know this is obviously a big triggering, the way the media has manipulated everyone with this over-labeling and dehumanization of all these schisms. The minute someone starts to criticize science, I know in a lot of people's minds who probably read and absorb the mainstream media, you're thinking, oh my gosh, here's a right-wing nut, QAnon, Trump-supporting wahoo. He's just going to go on some, very degenerative, intelligent speak about this. But I want you to understand that there is a deeply intellectual, brilliant, informed, critical criticism of science that is held by many people within the scientific community themselves. People that come to mind are Rupert Sheldrake. There's, if you even just look at a lot of Einstein's writings, he was very critical of science as being a great endeavoring to find and discover truth about our reality, but yet limited. And we need to really understand that very deeply, especially right now where science has sort of ascended to this kind of hegemonic kind of institution, if you will, that's now colluding with government to basically inform a lot of the policies that are shaping our world right now, including Agenda 2030, which is kind of the thing that all the governments of the world, at least that are informed by the World Economic Forum, which are all the rich, Western civilization countries, they're all following in lockstep, including my own home country of Canada. Our Prime Minister Trudeau has said we will be following Agenda 2030. So they're not hiding this. And we have to really understand as well, with one of the things that I've been most critical about the pandemic is the medical tyranny. And I'm not afraid to say that word. It is a medical tyranny. When you actually witness what has gone on in the last year and a half, particularly in the censorship of alternative viewpoints and actual even scientific criticism of how our governments have been orchestrating the lockdowns and such. And of course, we want to have compassion. I mean, everyone's just trying to do the best they can on a certain level. But when you look at the amount of duplicity that's being unearthed, where it's government officials who are absolutely shirking the rules that they vaingloriously propound in front of the cameras, and even to the point where you have like Prime Minister Boris Johnson of England, a whistleblower came forward, he was actually telling his ministers in Parliament to exaggerate the numbers. I mean, when you hear things like that, it should be an atrocious thing to hear and to absorb. And I mean, I think the most deeply and tragic irony is that the UK health minister, who was so strict on all these lockdown measures, he himself was cheating on his wife during a time when he wasn't supposed to be leaving his home, he wasn't supposed to be engaging in any behavior with another, and he was cheating on his wife. I mean, that alone should be deeply symbolic. And then, of course, they just had the Euro Championship, and they had this whole controversy where they had 200 UEFA officials basically saying they wanted to come into England and bypass the quarantine that's set there. And if they didn't, they threatened to take the final of the soccer championship and put it in Hungary. And it was a big debate. And of course, the English government kowtowed and allowed this to happen. And then there was this really infamous British some minister of something on camera, I think he was being interviewed by The Guardian, who actually said that, we should make certain allowances for very important business people not to have to follow any of these rules. When you hear things like that and you see, all the stuff that's being like pounded in us day after day to submit, to comply, and you see the kind of hypocrisy that's happening behind the scenes, this should be a moment of righteous anger that should really be embodied by the masses to witness how we're being played here. And this is not something new to, I think, a lot of us who've been watching this from day one with a very scrutinizing eye, because there's just been so many telltale signs that the pandemic, which I do believe is real, I do believe there is a COVID-19 virus that is dangerous, but it's being so heavily exploited for the profiteering of the elites, the oligarchic controllers of the kind of civilized system that we live within. And they've been doing nothing but consolidating more and more power as a lot of these small businesses just get absolutely devastated. And they're using science as a kind of weapon, as a kind of hegemonic tool, which reminds me a lot of how religion was used, in the past to basically, catalyze crusades and persecutions of heretics. We're now living in an age where if you question the science, even if you are doing so in a scientific way and you are a scientist yourself, you are likely to be censored. You are likely to be persecuted, meaning your career will be attacked. You will be shirked by your peers. There could be even like punitive penalties for you, such as the loss of your job. This is happening all over the place. This should be absolutely detestable to us all, and it should show that science itself is not this shining example of objectivity, and it is not holding the golden mantle of truth in our world. It is, like anything else, a set of belief systems, a set of values that has been corrupted by this grand capitalist, nefarious system that just co-opts everything. It's just colonizing everything in the world, and including science. And what's dangerous about this is that science is held in such a high standard as the way to know truth in our reality. And yes, I think within science, within quantitative measuring principles of our reality, using the empirical scientific method, there is a way to get certain precise measurements about our reality, which, yes, we can extract truth from that. And there's amazing things that science has brought to our world. And I'm not saying, just throw the baby out with the bathwater. But science itself also has a long history of being abused, of results being tampered, of confirmation bias, of being distorted. And in our present day reality with, the rollout of the vaccines and pretty much the censorship of everything that is not the allopathic Western medicine perspective, we're witnessing this kind of dogmatism, this scientism. So that's a beautiful ant that's just crawling around my telephone. It's funny when I do these talks here. I always have animals joining me. I see it as a kind of blessing from Gaia. And this is part of the work that is happening right now on the planet, and this is why it's also amazing to be alive right now, because we are actually witnessing the exposure of so many fallibilities in our belief systems, the very things that are driving our civilization. And for those who have eyes and ears to see and hear, this is an incredible time to take stock of where we have very gross imperfections in our belief systems and our way of thinking about the world and reality. And it's very important that science gets very checked right now, that we come at science with a true scientific scrutinizing eye, because science has also been the proponent of the devastation of the ecology of the planet with the Industrial Revolution. And science has really been ripped away from any reverence for nature itself. And this is why in a lot of my former talks, you can go onto my new YouTube channel, you can see like my talk on AI as the pinnacle of misogyny and such. You'll see I'm heavily influenced by the work of David F. Noble, the late David F. Noble, who is a brilliant mind on this world. He wrote the book, The Religion of Technology. I can't remember one of his other very famous books. It was pretty much a very deep and dynamic feminist perspective on science, where he was doing a critique of the misogyny and the patriarchy that's informed science for centuries, if not longer, because it has mostly been a male-dominated, rational-based way of looking at the world that has really schismed and cut itself off from the body and the more intuitive intelligences that are in the body, that are more part of the wise witch traditions of Europe, indigenous eco-spiritual knowledge. And what people need to understand is the reason this is the case is that there was a transference of deep religious fundamentalist creeds from the Christian dogmatism of Europe into what became the Enlightened period of the rise of science with René Descartes and such. And there, I think, therefore I am. What about feeling? There was just this mind-body duality, this Cartesian duality that became basically the way that science from that point on evolved. And that pretty much opened the door for a lot of the raping of Mother Earth. And I mean, look for yourself if you want to research Francis Bacon, the guy who created the scientific method. I've often shared this quote. He has a very famous quote where he talks about how noble the scientific method is, and he basically says, I want to put Mother Nature on the rack, like the torture rack, and torture and rape her for her secrets. This is literally from the mouth of the founder of the scientific method. I mean, if you want to see what's embedded in that, because I know it's very vogue right now for people who are doing all the beautiful work in calling out racism and decolonization, that we have to look at our ancestors and look at their belief systems and realize there's an inherent kind of value transference that we need to be aware of and that we need to be heavily conscious of, because these things can often act in a very shadowy way in our personalities. So I think we need to very much expand that into the scientific worldview. If you followed some of my first posts about the vaccine, for example, I got deeply shadow banned by Facebook. I don't know if it's still the case, but now when I post on groups, people have to click through this page that says Darren Austin Hall is a very dangerous individual. And it was because, I made this post calling the vaccine basically a proponent of a scientific method that is steeped in patriarchy, misogyny, racism, and colonialism. Because we have to remember, the only reason that science is, the supreme way of knowing about the world, and we have allopathic medicine, is because, we destroyed all the indigenous people of the planet, and we had this deep antagonism towards folk medicine and natural medicines that occurs to this day. And it's still playing out, if not more so right now. If you see the amount of censorship that's happened since the pandemic happened, I remember one of the most egregious things I saw was in the first months, the Canadian Holistic Alliance, Nutritional Alliance, put out on their official Instagram page that food does not boost immunity. I'll just let that sink in for a second. Food does not boost immunity. That's what they said. When you see this kind of stupidity, this insanity rather, being weaponized in such an official way, that should worry people, and it should also deeply, deeply affect us, to the point where we have to realize that although they say we live in a democracy, we're still very much living in a colonial system. We're still living in a system where the indigenous and the people who are the most marginalized are suffering deeply. And we've been kind of narcotized in a privileged world with all these conveniences to not really care. And now it's kind of at everyone's doorstep. Now it cannot be ignored. It doesn't matter how much privilege you have, everyone's being affected. And that's why there's an opportunity here for a lot of people to wake up and to consolidate and to start to share their voices together and start to realize what are all of our grievances and how we have to unite. We're not going to be able to resist this if we don't unite together. And if you want to know what you're resisting, look at Agenda 2030 at the World Economic Forum site. Look to the talks of people like Eric Schmidt, the ex-Google CEO, at some of the Davos World Economic Forum gatherings they've had. I highly recommend people going and checking out Whitney Webb. She's probably one of the best investigative journalists out there, Glenn Grunwald as well. Whitney Webb has been amazing. She's been calling out kind of a lot of this techno-tyranny stuff that's been going on behind the scenes. She's been exposing how the American government for a long time now has basically been in deep and secretive admiring of the Chinese Communist Party and how they've sort of erected this techno-totalitarian system where you have in classrooms in some places in China now children wearing headbands that monitor their brainwave activity, so that anytime they're distracted, or you have a little Mozart thinking about music and stuff like that, there's a beep, 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 and the teacher can go over to the student, basically chastise them. And of course, what they're chastising is the feminine. They're chastising the intuitive, the imaginative parts of our being. They're just trying to get everyone to be in this rational lockstep thing, because let's remember, AI is pretty much coming out of the male gaze. It's coming out of that masculine patriarchal system. It's all about rationality, calculation. The calculating mind is supreme. But there's this whole other aspect of our being, the feminine part of all of our being that's been abused and persecuted and really thrown to the wayside. And we're seeing the results of what happens when you create such a deep division in the very fabric of humanity. It creates an internal war and chaos. So it's very vital that we have our eyes very wide open right now to see all of these things, and that we allow our feeling-based bodies to really generate the feelings of necessary rage and anger and frustration that should be there, that should be a kind of normal response when we see the types of things that are being brought forth. And when we see the kinds of hypocrisies that are being put forth as well. And this is, very important work, because if you follow as well my teachings on the Gnostics, because I've been studying very deeply the Gnostic mystery schools of ancient Eurasia, and they were very clear about that one of the biggest problems within our species is that we have a lot of what they called mind viruses, which are distorted beliefs that have taken hold and that are very ancient. You look at a lot of the salvationist religion programs, for example, and we really need to be clear on what those are in this kind of full circle moment with the Shambhala warrior prophecy, using our minds to really heal the aspects of our minds that have been distorted with these belief systems that have then basically set the bedrock for the civilizations and the systems and the tools that we're witnessing in our world. No more clear for me on a personal level, because I work in the realm of healing and healthcare than the egregious problems within the medical system and the allopathic response to this whole pandemic. And that's not to say Western and allopathic medicine is the enemy by any means. There's beautiful aspects to all forms of medicine, but there's a deep problem when you have one form of medicine dominating and consolidating power in a kind of authoritarian, totalitarian way, and then persecuting all other voices, which is what's happening with science right now in medical science. And that's why it's acting kind of like a religion. And it's starting to cannibalize the intelligent voices in its own institutions, which is how fundamentalist religions operate. If there's any voices of dissent, people are highly punished. And that is what is occurring right now. And one of the last things I want to share is that, we really had a moment here when the pandemic hit where if there was humility among science and, the medical sciences, there could have been this humble moment of really issuing forth this self-effacing acknowledgement that, allopathic medicine really struggles in the treatment of disease. This is not news. When you actually look at its track record, it's pretty much a symptom controlling system that basically issues pharmaceutical interventions and surgeries, but it has really a horrendously poor track record in the actual curation of diseases, to the point where it's actually unlawful to even say that you can cure cancer in a lot of Western medical halls of power, which is absolutely ridiculous because there are lots of cures for cancer, if you haven't noticed. And so what could have been a moment of like humility and saying, you know what, there's this big pandemic now, this is unlike anything we've ever faced before, we need to have a Voltron moment of bringing in like Chinese medicine, herbology, Ayurveda, even the energetic medicines of Reiki, shamanic protocols, shamanic medicines, indigenous, traditional medicines. We could bring all of these systems together in this moment. We could be having summits all over the world, bringing the best of the best and all of these healing practices to create the most amazing and supreme healthcare that has ever fucking existed on the planet. This is what should have happened and still should happen, and it isn't. And in fact, it's going the whole other way. You're having the consolidation of power, hegemonic control happening in the medical science collusion with pharmaceutical companies, and they are absolutely distorting and suppressing the alternative and traditional voices. And this is egregious, to the point where you have the Lancet, one of the oldest and most apparently supreme medical journals on the planet, writing a pseudo-scientific report denouncing the effectiveness of HCQ because Donald Trump said it was effective. So politicized that they're just being willfully ignorant, to take a political shot at someone. When did it become more important to medical science to take a medical shot at someone over the health care of actual human beings? That is absolutely fucked, and we will not tolerate that. So it's up to us, the people, to come together and say enough is enough. We are seeing the collective insanity on display. Our leadership is compromised. We need to have new voices. I don't think it's actually going to happen within the system itself. I don't think we have to tear down the system. I think we have to be kind of Buckminster Fuller about this and just start building our own grassroots systems, whether that's something that can happen within urban centers or if it's something that we have to create outside of the urban centers, going back to the land where there's more space and there's more room to actually start architecting our own communities together, get back to like the village idea, which is how we lived for millennia in village strongholds. Yeah, strongholds, because you become a strong community. You take care of each other, you take care of your resources, you can create even like cultural and mythological meanings together and really like just go deep, The problem with empire was the rise of this kind of like transcendent person that all of a sudden took control of all these villages and started to say, you have to do this and you have to do that. Well, maybe it's time that we get back, to living in the land and deconstructing the whole idea of nationalism and stuff as well. I know that's what's been, the vibe down here in Costa Rica. There's a lot of amazing projects that are happening here of heart-centered people. There's lots of warranted criticisms with, neocolonialism and just moving to another country and using your privilege and just railroading the locals and such here and not paying attention to the indigenous. That is happening. You can see that. But I want people to understand there are also a lot of people who are on the ground here who are working directly with the indigenous, who are working with the locals, who want to move here to integrate and be a part of something. They don't want to take over. And it's beautiful what's happening in Costa Rica in that sense, because what is available here is an incredible biodiversity and a means to actually start prototyping what earth-based communities might look like to then share and make teachable to the rest of the world. Because that is really what it is about. The true source of power is having the right relationship to nature. If you can grow your own food, if you can take control of your own resources, and then on an eco-spiritual level, if you can connect to the consciousness of nature and the earth and the plants and the spirits of the animals and be guided into virtue, and just always be in that guiding realm of wisdom that is Mother Gaia, Mama Earth, Pachamama, that is how culture is really brought forth and created, is actually in that allegiance with these spiritual elements of our reality. And that's why, people are so interested in indigenous and ancient wisdom, because these are examples of cultures that had that kind of allegiance. And you see the beautiful texturizations that happen when a culture is deeply connected to the greater intelligence of the earth and receives, this knowledge from these greater spiritual worlds. I was just having a conversation with my housemate today, Caesar, about, channeling art, and how, in my source of resonance training, we always have an altar set up to the muses, because the ancient Greeks understood that art and music and all creativity is actually issued forth from these spiritual entities that were called the muses, which are these 9 female spirits, the daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne, the Titan goddess of memory. And you see this kind of technology, this idea, this mythological technology in a lot of these ancient cultures. And it was something that allowed this architecture of a mythological consciousness. And this is what is being asked of us right now in a world that's suddenly bereft of great mythic ideas. We need to bring forth this new earth idea. What is it going to mean to create a new civilization from the ashes of what is now being exposed as a kind of farce of democracy and a growing, tiptoeing, tyrannical, totalitarian regime? And we have to be very precise, because it's not about, again, throwing the babies out with the bathwater. There's good things coming forward too. I'm not saying all doctors are corrupt. I'm not saying all the politicians are corrupt. But it should be very clear that there is tantamount corruption happening. And it's a very dangerous corruption, because it's actually starting to coerce people to do things that they don't want to do, like taking medical measures that maybe aren't good for them, and they don't want to do it, and they're being pressured into taking vaccines and not allowing themselves to have the choice to make choices about their own sovereign body and their own sovereign health. When you have vaccines for donuts, come on, it's right there before your eyes. The whole idea of Western medicine is just take this magic drug, this magic pill, and your health is fine. That's absolutely ridiculous. Look at terrain theory. You have to keep your body and your wellness. It's your responsibility. And that's a big, big paradigm shift that is also happening on the planet, that I'm seeing in a lot of people since this pandemic started. People are taking profoundly great control of their health, becoming their own doctor, which is something I think Hippocrates, the great Greek medical doctor, said, that the greatest wisdom is someone who becomes their own doctor. With the internet, it's amazing, because you have so much access to information like never before. It's like this giant living library. So it's incredible that people can do their own research. Yes, I'm saying that. You can do your own research. You can trust yourself. Best to do it in, a collective community where you can check and hold each other accountable. Because I know a lot of people rail against, oh, did you just research on the internet? It's like, fuck yeah, I did. Because guess what? The internet is actually the most incredible digital commons that we've ever seen. It is the true form of democracy. It's a place where everyone can share their voices and their values. And yeah, guess what? It's a little more dangerous than just getting everything from CNN, one source. But, using your God-given Gnostic intelligence, your intuitive intelligence, your ability to talk to others, be self-effacing, we can really architect the strongest forms and bonds of truth, because we're now being given back sovereignty over our minds to really, and our knowing about the world. Anyways, I could go on and on and on. As you know, I'm a long-winded Gemini, but I'll leave it with you there. I think that's enough to chew on in this moment. I'm excited to see you all very soon. I'm going to be heading back to Turtle Island, to Canada next week, and I'm going to have a lot of offerings taking place. And if you want to dive deeper with me right now, my Honor All Creation Journey online course experience is starting next Monday. 22 wisdom teachings, all based on eco-spirituality, providing new meaning for the world around the new earth mythology and really connecting to the ancient wisdom on the goddess. So you can go and check that out, honorallcreation.com. Sending you lots of love. Let's be strong. See this as all the moments and adversity before us right now. These are opportunities for us to really grow into new strength together. And we were born for this moment. So don't you worry. This is our spiritual gymnasium happening right now. And we're, sweet are the uses of adversity, as Shakespeare said. I'll leave that with you there. Be glorious.